So one of the things that has not yet been mentioned about Brian is that you've done a huge amount of video production on YouTube, these virtual studio visits that give a huge amount of insight into your working, things that you think about, inspirations and things like that. And so I thought that for tonight, rather than retrace your CV, which is impressive and delightful, or try to recreate some of the magic of your studio visits, let's try to look at things sort of from the outside in, which is how we're all coming into this space. And I think one of the features of your work is that there's this element of invitation inward. So I was looking at, this is like 20 years ago, I got in the mail, I was on the mailing list for a gallery that mailed out DVDs of taped artist talks much like this. And so this was something that has stuck with me for 20 years, that Arnie Glimcher is sitting there with John Chamberlain, and they're mostly just talking about, it's a good game, we tried to get the ball in the basket, sort of post-game sort of interview stuff. And at some point, John Chamberlain says, ultimately, all art, John Chamberlain's the guy who crushes like cars into cubes of steel or whatever, so if we're all on the same page here. So he's like, what I do is I crush steel into cubes, but if you had to call it something, it would be abstract expressionism, because all art really is abstract expressionism. It's abstract, it's not the thing, it is the representation of the thing, so it's like an idea, and it's an expression. So how's that for a handle? Like that's going to be my, that's going to be what I call my work, says John Chamberlain. And so I'm coming at that memory because it's an interesting label to put on something that's hard to talk about. Your work is so, it's not, I don't want to say that it's complicated, but there's so many things I can say about it, and so many things you've said about it, that I want to find a way into it that's deals with a label that's not really been, that doesn't put up a stop sign. Because that's one of the great things about your work, is that there's this strong invitation into the material. So connecting up to the end, I swear I'm going to let you talk soon, it's going to be great. But connecting up to the end of one of Ryan's books, you mentioned advice to young artists starting off, and which is a couple of the great bits of advice are just like how to put paint on canvas, which is like great, but like you can see all around you, like that's how to put paint on the canvas, just get it on there. So, but the other thing was, you recommend to young people just to say exactly what you do in a great specificity, and this is surprising to me because there's John Chamberlain saying like, I don't know, here's a label, it applies to everybody, so it can also apply to me, which is like the vaguest, possible thing. And your description at that point in the book was hyper-specific. So I wondered if you could just start off by saying, give us hyper-specific, what is Brian Rutenberg's work? What's the, if you stand by that sentiment of a few years ago?
The only problem with art is mosquitoes. That's that. So in that short, concise sentence, I've basically told you everything you need to know about my paintings. I've connoted a place, probably at the bank of some body of water. There's a time of day, it's probably late afternoon. There's a temperature, therefore a season, it's probably midsummer, July, maybe August. There's a declaration, the only problem, and there's some sort of obstacle, mosquitoes. There's even sound, there's a buzzing sound. So for me, it's been very helpful to narrow down my job description into the most concise possible means, so that I can expound on that much more broadly, rather than have all these broad things that I do, which to me just confuses everything. So I've always felt that I think it was Faulkner that said, he talks about the postage stamp that he stands on, that he goes back to in his work. So I think of that postage-sized stamp piece of real estate that I claim as my own, and from that little tiny stamp, I try to magnify it or intensify it to the size of a movie screen. And that, to me, is the right direction to go, rather than from a broad platform inward. I've always told students that a painter must possess a a bulletproof, ironclad shit detector. Essentially, good ideas don't necessarily always make good paintings. It's important as a painter that you recognize the primacy of touch and that transfer of energy that happens when the painter puts down little skins of paint, and then the viewer stands in front of that action and, in a way, senses their own physical body looking at another physical body, which is the painting. So I think that when you stand in front of a painting, try to keep in mind that you are standing in the exact same spot that the painter stood as he or she applied each of those delicate skins of color to suggest light where there is no light and space where there is no space. So I think that is the central thread that runs through all of this work, and indeed all of my work for the past almost 4 decades, is that commitment to place. Stephen Westphal wrote something about my paintings in 1993. He said, "Paintings enact place." And I've always thought that was a really beautiful way to crystallize that and to remind us that a painting must be experienced in person. It is a meeting of skins, the skin of the viewer to the skin of the paint.
Yeah, I mean, there's something that's really exciting about standing in front of your work physically. There's like, you've spoken elsewhere about how the environment that you're creating within the painting is supposed to sort of surround, and I'm paraphrasing here, but
yeah.
Maybe you talk more about that in your words. But like, there's this sense of like, I walk up to something like this and I go like, okay, I sink into it. I feel this, this push-pull, the falling into a space. There's this sense of profound familiarity, even though I've never been to. I've been through South Carolina, but I haven't spent any time there. There's this sense of like the atmosphere, even in something that's very, very abstract. As you stare at it, you sort of wander into the space, and it just feels very familiar. I have like my own like sense memories that like are triggered by this, like cornfields in Iowa and like humid New England days and things like that. That surely were not or I'm guessing were not your experience, but at the same time they feel very. It matches in this way, and there's something just very magical about your ability to find something that's specific and universal, but not open-ended, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
It seems like you're making a very specific remark, and we can't just say anything about a Rutenberg painting. We can't say like that represents, I don't know, like spit out something random.
Yeah.
It's just not. It's not possible, or it looks ludicrous in the way that it might not for other artists. Other artists are very open-ended, So. This sense of this atmosphere enveloping your entire the viewer's entire consciousness. I don't know if that's the goal. Is that the end state of things? Or?
Yeah. Well, thank you for saying that even though you have not been to these geographic locations, that you still recognize it. And I think that's the job of an artist, is to make you feel like you have been there, because if we do it right, then we share an experience. There's a moment of telepathy in which you see the world through my eyes, and I think, and that creates again that transfer of energy, where I think real empathy can happen in terms of the primacy of touch, and in terms of the structure of the paintings as a ruse to bring you into that view or that experience. You'll notice almost all of the paintings have some sort of armature or structure, be it tree-like forms or some sort of aperture that frames a view that you look into, which comes from Pierre Bonnard. It's a thing he called void in the middle, in which he would often place a lot of the material at the edges of the composition and leave the middle sort of open and airy, if you think of the kitchens or the bathrooms that he painted. And that way it engages your peripheral vision as you gaze into the more ethereal space in the middle. So I like that idea of using thicker paint to buttress the edges, and then thinner paint, more vaporous paint, to suggest humidity, or that sort of capitulation that one experiences when it's 100 degrees and 98% humidity, and you're standing this deep in pluff mud in South Carolina being bitten by mosquitoes. So my job is to try to give you all that, but to do it in a way that's subjective and as abstracted, to use that word in the process sense, as possible, so that you have some sort of platform in which you can enter the picture as well. It's it's amazing to me how we all see different things, how we all like different things. And I just thought of when I had my first show in San Francisco in 1993 at Stephen Wert's gallery. Afterwards, they were doing a little party in Oakland behind the dealer's house in the backyard. And this old man came up and put his arm around me and he said, "Bri, I really like what you're doing. And I want to tell you that my two favorite things in the world are fine dining and fine painting." And I said, "John, I like fine dining and fine painting also." And he said, "Yeah, Cheesecake Factory and Thomas Kincaid." So like that. So we all like different things.
Yeah.
So like that.
I mean, there's something really great there because there's just something very appealing, and I've been trying to sort of tease out a journey in your work without leaning too hard on like with the actual facts of your biography, because I feel like there's a story you can tell looking at canvases over the last 25 years, which we have representations of around us, that is, it finds you searching for different, maybe it's different techniques to solve the same problem. Is that fair to say?
Sure.
I mean, there's something about it. So we'll skip back to 1997. You got the Fulbright Fellowship, which you used to go to Ireland and walk around and look at stuff. I guess before we get to all that, I guess one of my first questions is, you don't paint outside when you're okay. So the mosquitoes are all in your mind.
Yeah.
It's very important. Think of the number of mosquitoes you would endure during a canvas like this. It's unkind to you. So
my teacher used to say that all painting, when contemplated, is studio painting. So I always feel like nature is best when it's laid out on my studio table. Yeah. So what's interesting is that, you mentioned push and pull. So let me go there just for a second, which is a term coined by Hans Hofmann, the great German-American painter, which you all know or maybe not know. 1950s was considered the bridge between the European Surrealists and the New York School of Pollock, Joan Mitchell, de Kooning, Lee Krasner. And the way that I came to Hoffman was through graduate school. In 1987, I went to the School of Visual Arts master's program, and one of my greatest mentors during that time was a painter named Walter Darby Bannard. And I was painting in my little cubby one night, and the payphone rang down the hall, and it was Darby. And he said, "Brian, I'm really sick. I have the flu. I'm home. I'm not coming in tomorrow, so you're going to have a substitute. But I'm worried that you're going to like the substitute more than you like me." And I said, "Darby, it's okay, just get better." And "At teaching?" he said, like that. I said, "No." And I said, "No, just at the flu, get better," like that. So the sub comes in the next day, and it was Clement Greenberg, who's considered one of the most influential critics of the 20th century. And in that 45 minutes or so that I was with Mr. Greenberg, I remember he said that my work was pastoral in mood. And I was barely 21 years old. I had just moved from South Carolina. I thought maybe pastoral meant that it was dreamlike or bucolic, but I wasn't sure. So the next day, I ran to the New York Public Library and I checked out every book on Clement Greenberg I could get my hands on, and I took them back to my apartment and I read them. And as I say that out loud, I realized that's probably why I was still a virgin at that point. And what I discovered was that Greenberg, in his view, the pastoral did not arise out of frivolity, but out of tension. And he describes the pastoral as a retreat from civilization made possible by the very protection of civilization. So that's the part that I think that struck a chord in me, because that's essentially what I'm doing here, is I feel like I can grasp or possess the sensuality of the mud and the coast of South Carolina more dimensionally because I live 666 miles north. Yeah. So in other words, I'm not looking for compositions in nature, I'm making compositions from nature. And to do that, I have to first turn my back to the window. So it helps to live in a great urban environment like this so that I can better access nature, if that makes any sense.
I mean, it actually brings me back to the remark you made at the end of Clear Seeing Place when you're saying about the specificity of description in your own work. I think you said something like, I'm a Southern painter living in New York or something along those lines. But having those two place identifiers in your very simple description actually covers a lot of ground, because you're like, what's the subject? What's the content? Well, it's about this,
Right.
and here's how it's expressed. And so it's everything but the mosquitoes in that remark. I'm glad you brought up Clement Greenberg. That story, by the way, is just amazing and surreal. Did you like him better?
I liked him. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes,
Enough.
yeah.
Yeah. Anyway,
I don't know if
that's
he
a
liked
great
me, but-
substitute, guys.
Okay.
That's like,
Yeah.
oh, okay. So
Yeah.
they were doing math, and it's going to be Einstein. Okay.
Yeah.
So, I was just reviewing something there's a famous paper that it's like one of the required texts from Greenberg, where it's called the Avant-Garde and Kitsch, where he talks about what we have our vanguard artists who are doing, this was written in like 1938, so before Pollock and de Kooning and that sort of thing that he would later go on to champion. But he's talking about, there's the vanguard, there's the very best, the most extreme abstract modern artists doing their thing, and then there's kitsch, and kitsch can be the sort of followers of Da Vinci. It can be Norman Rockwell. It can be it wasn't talking about TV at that point, but it would be things like that. And there's an interesting tension there, because ultimately he's talking about, kitsch is a problem for Greenberg, because he also thinks it's like the fuel for fascism. Right. So it's like he mentions like the rise of the Nazis like a lot. He's very concerned about that. But he also acknowledges that kitsch is the everywhere thing. We all watch TV, we all listen to the podcast, we all have these like mass entertainment things. That's a part of all of our lives. That's why it's effective as a mass medium. And only a few of us can have the time and energy and resources to engage with very high esoteric culture. So one of the things that I feel like is very interesting in your work is that there's this approachability, and I don't want to say like popular or pop or certainly not kitsch, but there is this just attractiveness and seductiveness to like the quality of the paint, the colors, especially in recent work. There like seem to be pockets of your work that ebb into sort of muddier tones and grayer colors and things like that. But like right now, it's just like, oh man, those pinks are popping. It's just like fun, and yet, I don't think it falls into this world of, it's certainly not fascistic. I don't feel like there's any element of that. But it's like you're able to be very attractive and approachable without losing, becoming like a Pop-Tart, like losing this, it's like a very filling meal to sit with any of your paintings for a while. So. Was there a question in there? I'm sorry.
Yeah, it brings me perfectly into what I count as the greatest blessing of my life, was being born and raised in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, which, as you all probably know, is a resort town full of blinking neon lights and arcades and all-you-can-eat seafood signs, surrounded by some of the most ravishing landscapes on the East Coast. So one of the things that I could do as a kid was pay attention. And I paid attention to the fact that there were two landscapes simultaneously clashing head-on at 200 miles an hour. One was the natural landscape, and the other was the artificial, nickel-plated, neon-laced landscape. And then putting those two things together that didn't fit together, I think, is what made me a painter. I had no exposure to the fine arts whatsoever, and I think that was such a great boon for me, because I had to sort of not go in through the front door, but sort of come around through the side and figure stuff out. A lot of part of the joy of living in a resort town like that was that I had early exposure to carnivals and state fairs. So I remember being very attracted to carnival banners when I was a kid, because they were such vivid, simply composed representations, not of what will happen, but of what could happen, whether it was the pie eating contest or the human cannonball, whatever it was. The artist was giving you very simple, clear directions into what might happen. In other words, they were manufacturing desire. You wanted to pay your 5 cents and go into that tent. And my parents, being very supportive, got me the name and address of one of the local painters who painted the carnival banners. And like I always do, if I'm interested in someone, I wrote him a letter and I asked for his autograph. And a few weeks later, the response arrived and it said, "Dear Brian, unfortunately, I never give out my autograph. Sincerely, and it was signed by him. Like that. So whenever I take myself too seriously, I remember that letter. So to bring it full circle back, the way that I paint is I try to call it like worn in and comfortable, almost like a pair of blue jeans. It is accessible and it is approachable. And there is something very delicious about a big dollop of pink paint next to cobalt blue, because it doesn't have to be anything other than a big dollop of pink paint next to cobalt blue. That's the entry point. We all can relate to a delicious brushstroke because we all have a physical body. And when you bring yourself to something that exists outside yourself, you confront otherness. And I think that's one of the most beautiful things that a painting can do, is bring you in contact with something outside of yourself. Because again, in that moment, you edify or affirm your existence standing in that same place where the painter stood as he or she applied each brushstroke. So
I think you're eliding something out of modesty, but there's something that about your paintings that you just mentioned, that there's something universal about the bit of pink paint, big glop. And that is fairly universal, but the thing that tickles in me in particular is like, oh my God, I want to go paint. This is like exciting. And like I also feel like there should be warning labels like kids don't try this at home, because you're doing like these like it like works in ways that my imagination, my brain could never produce. But at the same time, like again, like the landscapes, you're like, this feels familiar to me. You're showing me a part of my own brain in a way that I hadn't looked at it before. And that's there is something like, biographical or just very abstract in some way of just going like, yeah, I don't know why those two colors work so well together, and I would never have thought to put them together, but it looks fun. Yeah. Like it looks like, thoughtful, balanced, and also like the circus, like maybe I want to be shot out of the cannon. Like I don't know if that maybe that's not a good example. There's somebody in the circus. You're like that looks like fun. Yeah. Also hard.
And it should be fun. And I tell people that all the time. The minute it stops being fun, it starts to become labor. And as soon as work becomes labor, I think you're toast at that point. I forgot what I was going to say. But again, like sometimes I feel embarrassed when I'm looking at like a Rembrandt, for instance, a self-portrait from 1666, because the feelings that I thought were my own were really his before, but I recognize them. So I think that's what a great work of art can do, is it helps you recognize something that you've never seen before. I think that's a beautiful way to live.
I mean, that's the exact same thing of the painting and the landscape. It's just like, when I stand in front of a Rutenberg, I'm like, I want to go paint because I feel like the idea is mine. You know? And there's something very generous in that you're able to give that to the viewer, because it's a great feeling, and it's a little misleading because you're not Rembrandt in those moments, but in a way, there's a neurochemical way where your brain is processing that image and living in that space, and that is like we all get to be Rembrandt for the time when we're really in the zone with Rembrandt and your work as well. I wanted to jump back to something, but if you had another idea, we can go there instead. Well, so getting back to the idea of kitsch, I want to talk about the your sort of side door or back door confrontation with fine art, which is you've talked about just having I think it was like a postcard of the Emanuel Aloysia painting of Washington crossing the Delaware. Everybody's familiar with Washington crossing the Delaware, I hope. There's a great museum just up the road. It's huge. It's a really big painting, right? And your first experience of it was not at the Met.
Yeah.
So I mean, tell us more about that, because I think it's an interesting play between. I don't know what Clement Greenberg would say about Emanuel Aloysia, whether either of those are good examples of kitsch or not. But you could tell, you've studied with them.
Yeah. So Emanuel Aloysia, Washington crossing the Delaware, 1851, hung in poster form over my childhood bed. And the only time I really studied it was when I was falling asleep, and the room was semi-dark. So there's something about when you squint, and I tell this to painters all the time, as you're working, you want to back up, very important, and you want to squint. Because when you squint, very salient things will pop out. Darks, lights, intense structural things, very simple shapes. So I got to know that painting through its composition. And I thought, wait a minute, he's not trying to make it look real, he's making a composition. And he's transmitting something to me through the shapes, through that dynamic triangle shape of the oar and Washington on the bow of the ship. through the use of red to sort of pull your eye through the center of the composition, if you follow red, and just the enormity of the big kind of glacial shapes. And I asked my parents for Christmas to take me to New York City when I think I was 14, to see that painting in person. And we stood there before this gigantic canvas, and everybody said, wow, it looks so real. It looks just like the real thing. And I broke loose and walked up this close to it and thought the exact opposite. I said, this looks so fake. I can see how he made this, how he took a big chunk of turquoise and dirty white and then pulled it with a knife to make it look like ice on the Delaware River, cracked with the ore. And then I thought for a moment, this was not created, this was made. Somebody made this thing for me to see. And that was a very seminal moment in my trajectory into becoming a painter. And still one of the foremost things that I put into practice was that notion that a work of art is not created, it's made. I used to think that a work of art just sort of fell out of the sky like a clap of thunder, fully formed. Like Lennon and McCartney would go into a room and write a great song, or Joan Mitchell would go into her studio and paint a luminous and enduring painting. And I was wrong. They worked at it. They worked really, really hard at it over months, days, and even years. And I started to realize that the goal of an artist, based on all of those studies, was not to get it right, but to move towards something that's eternally open-ended. And I like to always feel that I'm always moving towards something, but never quite getting there. I think that painting is a vehicle for truth and beauty, but a professional doesn't worry about those things. If you're trying to create beauty, you're lucky if you get attractiveness. And if you reject beauty, then you're still screwed, because just like a barrier, a door is just a barrier on either side. It doesn't matter. So I gave up a long time ago trying to create beauty in favor of a pride in craftsmanship, in how something is made. And the Emanuel Leutze is certainly one example of that, the Rembrandt, and also my affinity for Glenn Gould, the late Canadian pianist, who is my role model and my idol. Because I found out, again, through him, that there's a human being there making something. Because if you listen to his recordings, you can hear him humming in the background and sort of wailing and singing along as he plays. And if you listen in headphones, which I've done, you can hear his creaky chair squeaking because he gyrates as he plays. So there's a human being in there making this thing and loving us so much that he had to make this thing for us to experience later on, over and over and over again. So I think that's I think the primary starting point for my work is that notion of that a work of art is made as well as created.
I mean, the Glenn Gould is like fascinating to me, because I was like, you mentioned this at some point, or I saw it in one of your videos, and I was like, Glenn, like, are you just sort of like having me on? Because like he's a piano player, yeah. And then I just spent this morning. I was like, I should just get in the mood for Brian, and I put on some videos, and just watching him play, it's so joyful, and he's playing one line with his left hand and one line. I'm not a piano player. One line with his right hand, and he's humming something else. Yeah. Like there's like this third thing, and you're like. And it's not to be heard exactly, but it's just like the emanations of a fully, mind just fully in it. And that's, I think that the lovely thing about that is this element of like showing your work and allowing us to see everything that's going on. Like, let's look at the car as it's driving, which is a really exciting thing. Something that is, Emanuel Leutze, when you walk up to the ice in the front of the painting, you get to see the paint. You can see the brush strokes, you see how it's worked, and it is very worked over. But much more so in your own work, because there are just these things scraped away, things reapplied, and I think we've spoken before about the notion of sort of an excavation. There's almost like a time machine quality in each of these paintings, because. Can you see to the ground on all of them? Maybe, I don't know. I haven't found, I was looking at a couple of them. This nice one over here that looks like it's just like a bear just like took a whole scoop out of it. And it's just so delightful, because it's a little misleading. You get to see the work on the one hand, but also you get to see a little bit of your sleight of hand, because some things you're like, oh, that was scooped out so that we would get to see something that we're supposed to see.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're like, I don't know, maybe that was just a happy accident.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I just, there are so many things that just feel like happy accidents, and yet when you step back, as from the postcard or whatever it is, you see the whole thing coalesce into this very carefully balanced, like Bach or something like that. It's just there's point and counterpoint, and it's all very carefully structured. And that's again, I really thought I had a question when I started talking. Anyway, but there's the sense of being able to see back to the beginning of the painting. It's illusory. I don't think that we actually can. But there's not just a thinner and thicker paint. There's not just a central void. There's this almost sense of like we can join you on the whole process of this object's creation,
right.
Which really affirms that whole. It's an object.
Yeah.
And going back to Chamberlain, it's like, yeah, it's abstract. It is an image. Your relationship with this painting is not one primarily of touch or taste or smell, but it is a little bit of all those things. Yeah. It's an object, and that's something that I think is sometimes sorely missing from art criticism and art appreciation. Is like the slide is not the thing, the postcard is not the thing.
Right.
And I think you're very lucky to have looked at the postcard and said, I want to make that next step and go see the thing, because not everybody does, especially in our Instagram obsessed reality.
Right, because you realize as soon as something is digitized or put on our life support device, which is my phone, you lose that first generation and you lose the presence of the object. I think David Sylvester writes about this. And that loss of presence is profound, which is why so many paintings often look better on Facebook than they do in person, because the attention has not been paid to the primacy of touch and to that transfer of energy that's going to happen between me and my viewer on a one-to-one basis. You lose it when you reduce it down to just sort of a digitized image. That's why it's so important to experience paintings in the flesh, wherever you live. If you don't have great museums like we do here, go to the library or a community center or wherever there's actual paintings and look at them. Because I find that you can learn as much from lousy paintings as you can from great ones, because the pressure isn't there to perform or to be game changers. It's just simply sitting there in the corner inviting you to come experience it. And like Steve Martin said, it's easy to be great, it's hard to be good. It's much more difficult to be good consistently than it is to be great. Anybody can be great every now and then. It's much harder to try to be good. So I think that permission to try things and to experiment with materials and to excavate, like you said, because I'm not trying to play any tricks. Everything you need to experience the painting is right there in front of you. And the most, I think, accurate corollary might be juggling. Because when you watch a juggler, the juggler's not explaining to you what's happening. All the content and the subject and the object are contained in the action. All you need to do is bring your attention to that moment and watch that experience, which has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And sometimes the most beautiful things are seemingly innocuous, but if you just savor them when you're going to sleep at night, it's quite beautiful, actually.
There's so I don't know your feelings on Frank Stella, but he just died a few days ago, and sort of a titanic figure in abstract painting. And one of his most quoted remarks is, "What you see is what you see."
Yeah.
And I was digging into that the other day because I was like, I just wanted to find where he said that, because I every obituary is like, yeah, he said what you see is what. When did he say it? What was he talking about? What else? So it was at a Harvard lecture in 1964, and he's talking about process and all these things. But there's remarks in advance of that where he says, let me see if I got it to memory. He says something like, the whole point is that I want you to, in my work and in everything that I do, I want you to get the sense that you're seeing the whole idea all at once, and there it is. What you see is what you see.
Right.
And there's this, again, it's you said just now that there are no tricks, and that's certainly true. But there's this risk in letting it all just be out there. In the same way that there's a risk every time you go in with a knife or the back of the brush and take something away, you're destroying a little part of what you've expressed and hoping that whatever's under there is good.
Yeah.
And this is another thing I wanted to ask you about. How often do you destroy work? Like how much stuff like ends up just in the pile or gets painted over or something?
One of my first teachers, William Halsey in South Carolina at College of Charleston, used to say, "What you don't change, you choose." So that always reminded me that there are no happy accidents, because it is a decision in the end to either leave it or to omit it. And in terms of, what was the second part?
How much do you destroy?
I destroy probably 40% of what I make. Like that. In fact, today, about 2 hours ago, I was slashing like Jack the Ripper a canvas. And I learned very early on to not be precious about things. As soon as you're precious, you become self-conscious. And as Ray Bradbury said, anything self-conscious is usually lousy. So as soon as you think, I'm making art, stop. Phyllis Diller, my mom's favorite comedian, used to say, if the audience doesn't find you funny, quit. So if it's not humming along, as Gregory Amanoff used to say, I quit, and I simply do something else.
Yeah, I mean, like in your day, you haven't quit the profession yet.
No, yeah. Not the profession, but I literally quit.
Time to call it.
I do something completely else,
Yeah, I mean, how often do you make that sort of break and then go back to the canvas and discover that there was something? I mean, do you destroy things you wish you hadn't? Are there regrets there?
No, never regrets. Okay. No, I think if one does, then it becomes a problem.
Yeah.
No, never regrets. Because I can always fix something or go back to it later and redo it. So there's always that what I cited before, that feeling of moving towards something, and that something is always open-ended. And I know that I'll never quite get there, but there's something so pleasing about that glacially slow iceberg gradually moving towards something.
Are you? I mean, one of the things that I'm struck by, and especially the work of the last couple of years, is that it seems more energetic, more I don't know, like risk-taking is not quite the right word or couple words, but you seem to have just more energy on the canvas than you ever did before, and more openness, and like it's really exciting. I think there's always been energy. It's not like there was like, it's not a sea change, but there's something like, I'm looking at paintings that are, it's 25 years at Forum Gallery, but that's not all of your painting career. So you've been really chugging away. It seems like you're only building up steam. What keeps you sort of like excited and moving forward? Like what's the thing?
I think as one gets older and is in, I guess, mid-career at this point, and has done this for, 40 years at this point. Actually, more than that. Probably, 10 I started painting. At 48 years. I don't know, I think when you've done it for so long, muscle memory plays a big role in it. And also you feel like you have nothing more to prove. And you get to that beautiful state in an artist's arc of shorthand, when you can kind of get right to the point. When I get in, I don't think about painting. I don't start painting. I do menial tasks. I sweep the floor. I answer emails. And then before I know it, I'm standing up and I'm actually putting paint on canvas. And then before I know it, I'm going home. And I don't even think about it anymore. It's like a dry cleaning business. I show up, I work, and then I go away. And my studio mates, of whom there are 3, are the same. We've come up together over the last almost 32 years. And we're all really pros at this. So I don't know, there's something about doing something for a long time where it's shorthand. When other people were studying medicine or law or business and getting really good at it, we were learning how to draw and mix color. And I feel like it's accrued over time.
I love that there's like an ongoing tension over just like the last half hour that we've been talking about, where painting is work and painting is definitely not work. And I don't know if it's, I don't know that that's a tension we need to resolve, but it seems like it can be both or either. Maybe it's just work should be more fun and everything should be work. I don't know.
Well, it's work that maybe one is not necessarily cognizant that one is working.
Yeah.
But it is physical, and I never forget that part of it.
Talk about your brushes. This is fascinating to me.
Yeah, so I have enormous disrespect for my materials. I respect what they do, but a paintbrush is a wooden stick with a little bit of silk cat hair at the end of it, and it is not a tool for putting down precious marks. There's that horrible word again. It's a extension of my hand, which is an extension of my brain and my heart. So the first thing I do when I buy a new brush is I snap it in half. It does 2 things. It puts my fist closer to the surface, So as I paint, I can feel the friction of the surface, the hand moving, and it feels more primitive, like I'm mark making, which is essentially all we're doing. It's a very old practice. And it also pays enormous disrespect to the materials. I don't clean my brushes. I soak them in buckets of palm olive and water overnight. Then they come out of the water, they're dipped in towels and stuff, and I dry them off, and then they go into the paint thinner, and then they get back to work. And then, so I have some brushes that are 30 years old. It's what they do that I respect, it's not the actual tools. So my studio, it looks like an Italian air show disaster. Like that.
I was, let's see. No, there's so much to dig into here. I was gonna say, you gave me a lovely tour of your studio, and I was like, there's as much paint on the floor as there is on any of the paintings. There's something like, just the sense of balance and composition, and Glenn Gould playing, and just your decades of shorthand piling up. It also looks like you're just like getting in there and just fighting with the bear, which is an exciting thing to see. There's something about your ability to hold on to a very tight composition, and I think you must just be pacing back and forth. Or do you take photos of your work as you're doing it?
No, never. I work on 10 to 12 paintings at the same time, always with one specific show in mind. I try to do 2 solo shows a year if I can, and each show is planned out in advance, and I have about 8 months to make that body of work. And I just rotate them around the studio. Some I might work on for 5 minutes and not again for 2 weeks. Others I may labor over for a whole week. But they're very quickly rotated. I don't really think about them. I know that they'll inform each other. They become partners with one another. And very often, if I put dioxazine purple in one painting and it doesn't work, I'll take it over to the next painting and maybe it will work. And that's why it's so important to keep a messy studio, because painting by nature is the forcing together of things that don't go together. It's the cross-pollination of ideas that aren't meant to go together. And I think if your studio looks like a sushi bar where everything is completely separate and clean, I think those sort of cross-pollinations can't occur. So I think it's important to be really messy all the time.
I mean, just your remark about like, oh, if the purple doesn't work on one painting, I thought the next thing you were going to say is then I get rid of the purple because it failed over here. Why would it work over there? Yeah. But that's how you run a sushi bar, not how you make a. That's how this fish is bad. Let's not feed that to people. But quite the opposite when you're trying to make something new and figure out what alchemy is going to work.
Well, you don't think. That's the most important thing is turn off the ticker tape. Do, and then think when you stand back. That's why it's so important to stand back, because that's the moment when you analyze and you think about what you've done. But when you're actually applying paint, you have to train yourself to not think at all. You have to completely shut that off, because it is a primal mark-making, muscle memory endeavor. Is you're putting things down. That's Carol Appel, I think, would often turn his back to his paintings, hold fully loaded brushes in both hands, and then quickly turn around and put marks down before his brain had a chance to process it. So that's the bug zapper technique, I call it. Like that. Zap, and then you stop. So.
Rats, I had a really funny question for you, but I've just lost it. How can you beat a bug zapper technique? I was just going to say there's something interesting to see. I mean, You've always been drawing from life. I don't know if you draw from life, if you go out and look at a thing and do that these days, but there's definitely examples earlier in your work where I'm like, okay, that's not just a vertical line that we might interpret as a forest or a tree. That's a tree. Yeah. Like there's very specific aboutness here. And those seem to have ebbed away. There's like less of those things. Is that the shorthand that we're talking about, or is it?
Yeah. I back to the drawing part. I do academic drawings of trees, always in person, always in South Carolina. I sit on a little stool I have that I travel around with, and I copy exactly what's in front of me. I don't make anything up. And I think that truth to what I'm seeing and rendering the three-dimensional world on a two-dimensional surface is the first step to sort of imprinting those vertical horizontal relationships that this work is about onto my nervous system. So it comes from observation, and that's all abstraction is you are removing from real life and you're condensing and simplifying and putting it into a new context. That's why it's a process and not a style. But I very, very much think it's important to know how to draw and how to draw exactly what you see as realistically as possible. So it's something I still do almost every single day. And they are not source materials for the paintings. They are just simply exercises to burn one thing onto my nervous system so that when it comes back out, it's much quicker and more stripped away or denuded to bring you back to the last part when you said that they didn't look like trees anymore. They look like what Charles V. Dunning calls vertical signifiers. So I like if you take away or change the name of the thing, you change its function. It's not a tree, because then if you think of a tree, then it starts to become a little too placey, you know? But if you look at a vertical signifier, all that does is represent wakefulness. You're awake, and then there's a horizontal, you're asleep or dead, and then a diagonal is everything in between. So those three orientations are prevalent through the entire history of two-dimensional art. And next time you look at any painting, try to think of those three things and look at the way that the artist essentially, you know, encapsulates their entire experience in those three things.
I mean, it also serves that universality that we talked about earlier of you know, if you do a very tight drawing of a tree in South Carolina, then I go like, well, I don't know, there's that tree that Brian was looking at, right? But if we have a vertical signifier, then it's any tree, or it's the columnar, you know, form of human beings, or it's pillars, or it's something like that. But it allows me to walk into the picture wherever I find it. And again, that doesn't mean that it's open-ended, but there's a non-specificity about a particular, you know, your paintings are about a lot of things, I guess, but they're not botanical works, you know.
Right.
So I'm not supposed to learn what trees look like by looking at a Rutenberg,
Right.
and yet there can still be this element in there, which resonates in your brain, having seen trees and other vertical elements.
And just like in Cezanne, it's not, you don't need to know what an apple tastes like. He's reducing it to a series of planes that suggest apple-ness, but not necessarily an apple. It becomes just part of an overall shimmering structure that is, in a way, more truthful than real life, because it's been passed through the psyche and the imagination of a great painter and then put into physical form. It's more real than real, if that makes sense. Yeah. Because you pick up where he left off, and you realize that you're both constructing something and discovering it at the same time, if that makes sense.
I wanted to step back to there's a fun little diagram you put in one of your books about, you know, like, here's who I studied with and here's who they studied with. And like, you took a couple of routes, and you're like, eventually you get 7 steps back and you get back to, you know, David or whoever and which is a delightful thing, but there is a connection of craft and mark making and building of the physical object, which obviously you're using the same paint. There's a few innovations in colors that have taken place in the last 150 years, but for the most part, oil paint is what it's been for the last 800 years. Yeah. And I just like that it's you're essentially doing the same thing, and you're very much in this tradition of like, let's build the thing, let's build it out of these very, in some ways, rudimentary materials. So, and that as well brings us back to, I think one of the most vivid images that you talk about is just like playing in the mud when you're 10 years old or so. Yeah. And which is like the same, like, very physical, primal stuff, but it's also very sophisticated, because oil paint and colored bits of, like, material deposits in South Carolina mud are not fundamentally very different objects. So anyway.
Yeah, I mean, oil paint is crushed rock mixed with liquefied fat and smeared on cloth. So it's pretty organic. And to devote one's life and one's career to the sort of promulgation or dissemination of that attention to detail and that building of something that's so sensual, something that the Fishkos have devoted their lives to is the promotion and the exhibition of those simple ideals, that this is a continuum. I'm simply part of a larger, iceberg that's moving towards something. No better, no less, just part of something. And I like that feeling that that maybe if I can in some small way make a contribution in honor of those who came before me, the ones who are still alive, and the ones who are not with us anymore. So I love that part of it. And to go back to the mud part, that was my first inkling that I wanted to be a painter, I guess. I used to take marsh mud in the Carolina marshes, splat it on the dock under the sun, and I would take little bits of colored paper and arrange it across the mud, then another fistful of mud on top of that, and then I'd get an oyster shell, and I would skim the layers of that slime to reveal little jeweled flashes of color of varying intensities depending on how hard or lightly I scraped. So right there was process and pressure and sort of attention to revealing or not revealing things that were already hidden in there to begin with. And I loved it, and I did it over and over again, and it didn't mean anything, but it just felt right to me. I felt the most like myself, and everything I needed was right there at my feet. After I finished, I just swatted off into the dock and into the water.
It's got everything like a painting, but permanence. Like
Yes,
these paintings will last, 800 years and counting. Like we don't really know the upper limit of the life of an oil painting. But
actually, interesting thing, Halsey, who I mentioned before, used to say that a painting is like a circus tent. It's a couple of wooden sticks, 4 in this case, supporting a flimsy piece of canvas. So there's always the feeling of its inevitable dismantlement. So like a circus, it does a show, and then it goes away and goes to the next town. So I love that when you're looking at a painting, it feels permanent, but in your mind's eye, it's also kind of transitory as well. When you walk away, it kind of disappears and it goes away, and you're sort of left with that vibration. And then when you go to the next painting, you bring the remembrance of that painting you just saw to the next one. So that experiencing painting is a collective, accumulative experience. Every painting you see is the summation of every painting you've ever seen before. And that's why it's important to just look as much as possible. Look a lot and paint a lot. That's the most important thing.
And look at a lot of paintings in the flesh. I
Exactly.
mean, that's the takeaway. I mean, I don't know if we've been talking for like 2 hours and 15 minutes, but will somebody flag us if it's been too long? Should we? No, we can keep going. No one's telling us to stop. Well, I did want to bring back I think the most moving remark that I've come across in your work collectively is just that there's something that Emanuel Leutze did and that you do, and I would say painters generally across history have been doing, is just putting this crafting this moment and this experience for you to stand, as you say, like in front, just right where the painter was standing. This is not something that all the other art forms allow us to do. Like when you open a book, it's quite distinct from the way the author was doing the thing. You're not physically in that space in any way, shape, or form. When you go to the opera, you're very many steps removed. The closest I can think in music is like a player piano, like might have exactly transcribed the finger movements and show you the keys moving when Scott Joplin played, ragtime. So, but with a painting, you just have this quality of like, we can stand right in front of this thing, and it was made, for us, the viewer. This was put in, it was baked, this confection was made so that we can look at this and get the thing out of it. Yeah. And it's just such a sweet and loving, I don't know, way to look at art that is sorely missing from the rest of my art viewing experience, because it's easy to go, but like, this is an important thing. This is an obelisk, and this is a thing that we need to take very seriously. It's easy to take your work very seriously because it's also just very inviting, and you just feel that embrace from the first second and after the first hour. So
thank you.
Anyway, thanks for inviting us in. Can we?
Would you like to open it up some questions?
If there are, sure. Yeah.
Does anyone have any questions?
Yes.
About trees?
Yep.
Aren't these trees over here?
Yes, a tree. Yes, they are. Yeah.
There's this
tree-like.
There's this great.
I'm looking at this painting, I'm saying, wait a minute, that's like trees.
Yeah, I mean, certainly that's the first step. Yes.
There's this great quote. I don't want to steal your time, but there's this great remark from Picasso where he's painting a woman and his eyes are over here and whatever, elbows everywhere, and somebody comes in and says, "That doesn't look like a woman," and he goes, "That is a painting." whoa, okay, right? Anyway, yeah, that's a painting. That's not a tree. Come on, we know this. Okay.
Yes.
Why Ireland? Was it because of the bogs?
Yes.
Is there similarity to the swamps of the...
Yes. Why Ireland? So in 1997, I got a Fulbright, and I decided not to go to Italy or Spain or Morocco. I decided to go to Ireland because I like Irish poetry, and I like 19th century Irish landscape painting. And I thought, if there's any one place I can go where the physicality of the ground, the sogginess of the ground, and the fact that you get 4 seasons in one day would be the best teacher possible for my sense of tonality and my sense of using color and the nuances of color. And I studied Irish Celtic art, Neolithic art. I met with a number of poets, and we actually collaborated on some things. And it was one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. It's a fantastic country with a great oral tradition, and I love that notion of storytelling through imagery and through the rugged landscape. Yes.
So, you've been with this gallery for a long time, and your art has changed, right? And I wonder how you would describe your changes over the years and the kind of painting you're doing and the discoveries you're making.
The notion of the changes in the last 25 years. It's so slow and I'm so close to it, I don't really see that part. I just go from body of work to body of work. Certainly there will be sort of maybe palette changes when different things happen in one's life, the deaths of parents, the births of children, things like that. Certainly color may ebb and flow in those ways. And then there'll be periods where I'll try to empty everything out and get back to just simple shapes again. And then that will very quickly become populated back with that cacophony of light and sound and all those stimuli that I so much rely on as where I come from. So I don't really notice it. That's I guess the best answer.
I think there's an interesting thing, especially in the Irish paintings that have this, or the paintings that were made in the wake of your time in Ireland.
Yeah.
I don't know if they're all painted in Ireland, but
yeah.
So there's like these sort of egg-shaped and face-shaped forms that pop up, and in some ways it's a distinct form, but in other ways it's the same sort of process that you described earlier, where we're going to put these sort of framing devices, thicker paint on the outside. The oval is a different shaped framing device, but it actually harkens back to 19th century landscape traditions where you go like, well, here's the near forest around you, and you get to see this little keyhole through the trees. And so it's in many ways it seems like it's of a piece of the same process. Like you're trying different mechanisms. I don't know if that's the way that you think of those paintings. Yeah, no, that's the way I do. So
that's very perceptively put. That shape, that oval shape, is very prevalent in Celtic art. I took it as the shape of the face and also the shape of the lens of the eye, both as the receptors of the landscape, of the world. And then that framing device, just like Francis Bacon would use those glass boxes around the popes, it's just simply a way to say, here's this, and it's in this space, it's a space inside of a space, look into here. And that's all I'm doing is creating this sort of artificial proscenium. And the key word there is artificial, that this is not a landscape, this is a highly composed, idealized, and I would say mannered or stylized impression of a landscape. Not description, but impression. Description to me connotes translating empirical observation into knowledge, and then you can translate or record knowledge. An impression is a sensation that's already passed. So there's that vibration when something has already gone past. You have that little vibration, that tingle in your mind. That's the part that I latch onto, and that's the part that I think informs sort of the spark in every one of these views.
And all those sort of apertures or encasements that you're creating, whatever their shape are, I think the most important line that you're controlling is not in the painting, but the relationship between the painting and the viewer.
Right.
Because as with Bacon, it's like, okay, so the Pope is now in this box.
Right.
What does that do to our relationship
Exactly.
to that space? Are we invited or are we pushed away?
Yeah.
The same thing with the Leutze. You're like, wait, if there's all these people on this one little boat, are we in the boat? No, we're not in the boat. That's one of the first things you notice,
Yeah.
right? And so that's a push away in some ways, but you're also invited because the only other option is that I guess you're in the icy water, and that's not very nice either.
Right.
So there's these. This is the when contemplating these sort of framing devices, that's the relationship, which again puts us back in that moment of contemplation of the object itself,
Right.
going like, this is where the painter stood.
Right.
This is a conversation between me and that consciousness.
And I think it acknowledges my fidelity to my viewer, that one-to-one. I'm communicating something directly to you and only you. And I love my viewer, and I want to express that love through the sensuality and the worn-in comfortableness of the paint. And when I pick a color, you can bet it's going to be the best color, not for me, but for you. And when I make a form, I'm trying to make the best form, not for me, but for you. So there's that notion of generosity, which Gregory Amanoff instilled in me, that I am trying to express or show you the way that I see the world. And I'm saying, come over here, stand next to me, and see what I see for a minute. So I love the fact that it's a one-on-one experience, a painting. It's very intimate, and that's all those apertures do, is create a device to acknowledge your presence in that moment, looking through it into this space that we create together.
I mean, it could be otherwise. There's many ways that you can use those, encasing things. But in your work, it seems always to be a generous invitation in, which is one of the reasons that the first time we spoke, I was impressed that you were able to sort of just switch into sort of like art form speak, like grad student language. And I was like, oh, he knows all the languages. This is great. But we haven't done that here tonight because it's just not. It's another way of putting a layer between the work and the viewer and saying like, maybe don't come in, maybe read the book. I mean, I'm glad that you read the pile of Clement Greenberg, when you did, but it seems not necessary to approach what is fundamentally a very simple thing if it works.
Yeah, because I don't think of it as making art. I think of it as making stuff, just like the mud and just like the unprecious. So there's nothing more deadly dull than art speak, and that's why the only problem with art is mosquitoes. Okay.
Yes, we landed it.
Yep.
Sorry. Brian, thank you.
Good ending.
Were there more questions? I don't know if there's time or not, but there's no time. Look at that. Brian, thank you so much. Thanks to everybody at Forum for having us. This has really been fun.
Thanks for taking time to be here.
You are amazing, sir. I'm really impressed.